He hadn't spoken her name out loud in almost 2 years. Not because he didn't think of her, he did. Every single day. But because the sound of her name carried a weight that was too much to bear. That morning, when Can Yaman walked into the interview studio in Milan, he had no idea that today would be the day he finally broke that silence. The room was quiet, sterile in the way most high-profile interviews were. White walls. Soft lighting. Minimal distractions. A production assistant adjusted the microphone on his jacket, smiled politely, and walked away. The air felt heavier than usual. Or maybe it was just him. He hadn't slept well the night before. A strange mix of memories and restlessness had kept him awake. The smell of rain, a song that played randomly on the radio, a dream he couldn't fully remember. But her presence, it was everywhere. The interviewer, Martina, an experienced journalist who had a gift for pulling truth from even the most guarded celebrities, welcomed him with warm professionalism. "We really appreciate you being here, Can. I know your schedule is insane." He smiled, nodded. "Always happy to talk." They began with the usual, upcoming projects, the new series, what it was like filming in Spain. He moved through those questions effortlessly, the way a seasoned actor does. But as the minutes passed, she shifted. "Can," she said softly, "there's something I've wanted to ask you. And please feel free to decline." He tilted his head. "Go ahead." Martina paused. "You've been in the public eye for a long time now. And through all of it, fans have never stopped talking about one thing, your connection with her. With Demet." His body stilled. Just the mention of her name sent a wave through him. He smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I know," he replied. "You never really talk about it. But when people see old footage, when they look back at that time, there's a kind of magic that still lingers." "Do you ever think about those days?" He let out a slow breath. "Yes," he said simply. "I think about them a lot more than people realize." Martina leaned forward slightly, sensing this wasn't a moment to interrupt. "What's something you remember most vividly?" Can's gaze lowered to his hands. "The way she laughed," he said. "She had this lightness in her. Even when everything around us was chaotic, press, cameras, rumors, she stayed grounded. She had this way of making everything feel okay. Even if it wasn't." There was a pause. And then something shifted in his expression, almost like he was fighting an internal battle. "There's something I've never told anyone," he continued. "Not in interviews. Not even my closest friends." Martina's voice dropped. "You don't have to, if I want to," he said firmly. "Because maybe it's time." He adjusted in his seat. "I was in Istanbul last year," he began. "It was for a foundation event. I hadn't been back in months. I tried to avoid certain places that reminded me of her. But life has its way of pulling you exactly where you don't want to go." He paused. "There's a bookstore we used to go to," he said, a sad smile appearing. "See Hanger. Rainy days, lazy afternoons, it was our little escape." She loved books. Not just reading them. She loved the smell of old pages, the texture of covers. She used to get excited about first editions. Martina listened in silence. "I walked past that bookstore that day," Can said. "And I don't know why, but I went in. I hadn't set foot in there since we ended. Maybe I wanted to punish myself. Maybe I hoped she'd somehow be there. I don't know." He looked away for a moment, jaw tightening. "I was standing near the philosophy section. And then I heard her voice." He swallowed. "She was behind me. Laughing. Talking to the owner. Asking about a book. And I swear to you, in that moment, it was like the world collapsed." He shook his head slowly. "My knees felt weak. My heart, it just stopped. I hadn't heard her voice in so long. Not like that. Not real. not unfiltered. And it broke me. Martina blinked, visibly moved. "What did you do?" she asked gently. "I didn't turn around," Ken said. "I couldn't. I just stood there, frozen." I listened to her speak for maybe 20 seconds. And then I walked out. Fast. Like a coward. Like a man who knew he couldn't face the truth. He laughed bitterly. "People think time heals everything. That you forget. That you move on. But I'm telling you, some voices stay with you. Some memories, they don't fade. They sharpen." Martina spoke softly. "Do you think she saw you?" Ken looked at her. "I hope not," he said. "Because if she did, she didn't say anything. And I couldn't have handled that." The studio was still. Even the crew seemed paralyzed by the rawness of his words. "That was the moment I knew," he whispered. "That I hadn't moved on. Not even close." The days following that encounter in the bookstore weren't normal. Ken had returned to his hotel that evening, a luxury suite overlooking the Bosphorus, but it felt like a cage. The view was stunning, sure, but all he could see was her reflection in his mind. Her voice looped again and again, like a haunting melody he couldn't turn off. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he replayed every detail of their last months together. The things left unsaid. The calls he should have answered. The moments he should have held her instead of walking away. People around him had always said he was strong. Resilient. That nothing could shake him. But what they didn't know was that Can Yaman had been living with a silent ache inside him for years, a quiet grief, invisible yet ever present. He had loved her. That much was never in question. From the very first moment they met, something had clicked. Not just attraction. Not just chemistry. It was something deeper. Something neither of them had words for at the time. "She had this way of looking at me," Ken once told a close friend during a drunken night. "Like she saw through the fame, the image, the noise, and just saw me." But love, as powerful as it is, isn't always enough. Their lives had begun to change rapidly after their breakout success. They were no longer just actors, they were icons. Paparazzi followed them everywhere. Fans scrutinized every gesture. Management teams got involved. Schedules clashed. Ego crept in. "We started fighting," Ken admitted to Martina later in the interview. "Over little things. Stupid things. Whether I answered my phone. Whether she looked distant at dinner. But deep down, we weren't really mad at each other, we were just scared." "Scared of what?" Martina asked softly. "Of losing what we had," he said. And ironically, that fear made us lose it. One memory, in particular, stood out in his mind. It was a rainy Tuesday. She had come over to his place after a long day on set. They were both exhausted, emotionally drained, but trying, always trying, to keep the connection alive. She had brought him soup. Homemade. He remembered because she always teased him about not knowing how to cook anything more complicated than scrambled eggs. "I made this for you," she had said, placing it gently on the table. "It's not perfect, but I know how you get when you're stressed." He hadn't even looked up from his phone. He was texting his agent about an opportunity in Italy, something he now regretted ever pursuing. And when he finally looked up, her eyes were distant. "I'm here," she had said, voice trembling, "but you're not." He hadn't responded. He didn't know how. That night, she left without saying goodbye. And the next morning, she didn't come back. Ken clenched his fists now, sitting in the interview chair, recalling it all with painful clarity. "She gave everything," he said. "Her time. Her heart. Her patience. And I thought she would always wait. That love meant never giving up. But I pushed too far." He looked down, voice dropping to a near whisper. "I let her walk away." Martina, deeply moved, spoke carefully. Do you think she's forgiven you? I don't know, he replied. And maybe that's what hurts the most. Not knowing. For months after their breakup, he had thrown himself into work. One series after another. He accepted every role, every interview, every endorsement deal. To the outside world, he was thriving. But inside? I was empty, he confessed. I'd go to award shows, smile for the cameras, give interviews in 3 languages, and then go home and sit in silence. He paused, then added, once, in Rome, I saw someone who looked like her. Same hair. Same walk. I followed her for a block before realizing it wasn't her. I felt like I was losing my mind. He looked back at Martina with eyes clouded by memory. You asked me earlier what I'd say to her if she were watching this, right? She nodded. I'd say, I never stopped loving you, he said, emotion trembling in every word. I never will. Even if we never speak again. Even if we're strangers now. That love, it didn't die. It just became quiet. Still. But it's there. Always. Silence filled the room once again. Martina, usually so composed, reached for a tissue. Thank you for sharing that, she said gently. I think a lot of people will see a different side of you after this. Ken smiled faintly. Maybe. But I'm not doing it for them. I think I'm doing it for myself. And for her. Even if she never hears it. As the cameras rolled on, capturing the rawest version of him the world had ever seen, there was something almost poetic in his brokenness. A kind of truth that fame had long buried beneath layers of control and presentation. He was no longer just the heartthrob. The idol. The television star. He was a man who had lost something irreplaceable, and finally found the courage to speak about it. But little did he know, that day in the bookstore wasn't the last time he'd hear her voice. And that moment would shatter him in a way nothing else ever had. It happened 3 weeks after the interview. By then, the footage had aired. Millions had watched. Headlines across Italy, Turkey, and even Latin America read things like, Can Yaman finally opens up about Demet, a love that still lives in silence, his most emotional confession yet. And yet, she hadn't reached out. He hadn't expected her to. But he'd be lying if he said he hadn't hoped. That final sentence he spoke, I never stopped loving you, wasn't scripted. It wasn't for publicity. It wasn't even meant for the camera. It was meant for her. And in the quiet that followed, he had secretly waited for some kind of sign. A message. A phone call. A voice. But none came. Until that night. He had just wrapped a long day of filming in Budapest. Exhausted, emotionally drained, and with barely enough strength to remove his boots, he collapsed on the hotel room sofa. The lights were low. Outside, snow was starting to fall. He was scrolling through his phone absent-mindedly, nothing special, just trying to unwind, when a notification popped up. A voice message. Unknown number. He stared at it for a moment, thumb hovering. Something inside him recognized it. Not the number, but the weight of it. As if the universe had paused, holding its breath. He tapped it. And there it was. Her voice. Soft. Hesitant. Vulnerable. Hey. I saw the interview, she began. Ken sat up straight. Every nerve in his body electrified. I didn't plan to watch it. A friend sent it. Said I should see it. I wasn't sure if I was ready. But I did. Her voice trembled slightly. I don't know what I expected. Maybe anger. Maybe indifference. But what I saw was you. The you I knew before everything got so loud. Ken covered his mouth with his hand, as if trying to hold back the wave of emotion crashing over him. I didn't want to reach out, she continued. Not because I don't feel anything. But because I've spent so long trying to build a life without you in it. I told myself it was the only way. That if I ever heard your voice again, it would undo me. She laughed lightly, almost sadly. But then you said it. That you never stopped loving me. And that broke me. Tears welled up in his eyes. I'm not calling to reopen wounds. Or to pretend we can go back to who we were. Too much has changed. We've changed. But I wanted you to know. I loved you too. So much. Maybe too much. And when I walked away, I didn't do it because I stopped loving you. I did it because I was losing myself. A silence followed. And then, her voice returned, softer than ever. But even now, after all this time, when I heard your voice again, I broke down too. And then the message ended. Just like that. No goodbye. No invitation. No promises. Just two voices, finally meeting again in the middle of all that silence. Can sat motionless for a long time. Phone in hand. Heart on the floor. He had waited so long for this moment. Imagined it. Dreamt it. Rehearsed it in the mirror of his soul. But nothing could prepare him for the ache of reality. Because what she gave him wasn't closure. It wasn't hope either. It was something in between. It was a whisper in the dark. A shared confession between two people who had once touched the stars, and then lost each other in the fall. He played the message again. And again. Each time, her voice carved deeper into him. Not to hurt, but to remind him that it had all been real. That the love they shared wasn't a fantasy. It lived. It breathed. It broke. And now, it rested in a space between longing and peace. He never replied. Not because he didn't want to. But because he knew some messages weren't meant to be answered. They were meant to be felt. So, he saved the audio. Gave it a name only he would understand, her echo. And every once in a while, when the nights grew too heavy, when his chest ached for something he couldn't name, he would press play. Not to reopen wounds. But to remember. To remember the voice that once called him her storm. To remember the girl who once made Istanbul feel like home. To remember that love, even when lost, can still echo through a lifetime. And that sometimes, when you hear her voice again, it doesn't break you because you're still in love. It breaks you because, for a moment, you remember the version of yourself that loved so deeply, so fiercely, and so purely. You'll never be that person again. But you'll always be grateful you were.